Hello.
That's Bob.
Hi. I'm Bob Berger, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you guys have. Thanks very much for coming. Really, thanks. So we've done this sort of Q&A after every one of us when our play opened, collecting my comics in 1999. To as many of these screenings that we've been able to do it. So really just comfortable answering any questions you have, and then we'll go here. That's all.
Yeah.
There was a credit in the credit there, instigator. What is that? I've never seen that credit.
It's Don's credit.
That's you'd have to know Don. Yeah.
So this is all taken from written transcripts, right?
Yes.
And how did you determine what the emotional approach of the actors would be on the basis of that?
Well, excuse me. Great question. Ultimately, actor's choice. The question was, how did we interpret the emotional content, right?
Correct.
Basically, the theory about that was that we definitely did not want to portray these actual people. So we instructed the cast on the very first script reading, that they were not supposed to research these people, find out their regional accents, where they were from, what they were like. We wanted them to understand what they were saying and to put themselves in those situations. And the truth is that if you recorded any conversation and then read it afterwards, especially conversations like these, it's not, we think that we thought it was actually not that difficult, really, because it's a lot of all business. It's a lot of working.
And were they off book for that whole thing? It was all memorized, there was nothing read, all that?
Yeah, everything. So this was filmed in front of live audience over the course of 3 performances in 2012. And everybody that was on stage was 100% off book. Wow. Thanks. Yeah.
Could you talk about the sequencing of these crashes and why they're organized the way that they are in the final? I don't know if there's a difference between the way it was performed live and this film.
No, it's exactly the same.
Yeah.
So, given that if the premise was we were going to use cockpit voice recorder transcripts for the source script of a documentary theater, there are certain things that we had to decide were absolutely necessary, which were that we would do our best not to edit them. I mean, there are edits because we definitely made choices like not casting the play sex specifically, right? So men are playing men, women, we didn't care. We had great actors and we wanted to use them. So therefore he's and she's changed, things like that. Also time. So some of these are really accurate to the time that the accident happened. And these transcripts are down to the millisecond when you look at them in the report. But of course, sometimes people shut up and fly an airplane for 5 minutes without talking. So silences are edited out to some extent. So what can we do to shape the experience to the audience, to give a sort of narrative, not just to each thing, but to the whole thing? Well, we can choose how long they are. We can choose what happens during them, right? And what that sequence is. So those are things we paid a lot of it. Once we had done research and read many of them and sort of had an idea of what we wanted to do, we started looking at how to structure it in a way that we felt had that. And so, yeah, I mean, the sequencing of that was intentional. Yeah.
How did you get your hands on the transcripts?
So, just so everybody knows, the actual recordings, especially, definitely in the United States, of a cockpit voice recorder are never released, ever. It doesn't happen. And any time that you might think that you've heard a cockpit voice recorder, what you might have heard is the recording of a radio between the tower and the airplane, because that's over the air, and we can tune in on our cell phones right now to JFK. But cockpit voice recordings are sacrosanct, and because of agreements between the NTSB and the pilots union and all sorts of things, they're never released. Other countries have their own laws, and things might have been released afterwards or something like that. But after an investigation concludes, if the cockpit voice recording was deemed relevant to the investigation, then there's a transcript that's produced. And the way they produce that transcript is they sit a bunch of people down around the table with audio equipment, and they all listen to it, and they all have to unanimously agree that this is what it is. They argue about it, they listen to it over and over again, and when they all come to an agreement about what it is that they're listening to, then that becomes the transcript. And things like, another question about editing, things like profanity are redacted. Things that are unnecessary, that are deemed irrelevant, are redacted. So, to your question in the back, profanity becomes actor's choice to that extent, right? I mean, it might be obvious what that profanity might have been, but that's what it is.
Where did the idea for the film come about?
The idea for the play
Yeah.
came about because Irving Gregory and I were having a conversation about reality television in 1999. And boy, did we figure something. No, but we were having this argument about reality television and mediation of reality for entertainment. At that point, the only reality television that there was Cops. And we were on our way to Shakespeare Books and Company across the street from NYU on Broadway, because I promised somebody I was going to read a book, and I hadn't ordered there, and I had to go pick it up. And by the time we got to the bookstore, we were raging in an argument. At the front of in Shakespeare Books and Company, there's that table. I don't even know if they're still there, but in many bookstores, there's that table with all of the controversial books that they want people to buy. And we're yanking books. We're having this argument. I'm like, look, it's the San Quentin Guide to Knife Fighting. Look, it's a coffee table picture book of surgery. And we're in the bookstore, and we're kind of shouting at each other. And anyway, I wanted to get the book, so I was looking around to distract Irving, and I saw a book that I'd read a few years previous in around 1995 when I was a cameraman working for CNN and covering the crash of Flight 800, which was a book about investigating airplane crashes. I said, hey, Irving, go look at that. And Irving went to go look at that, and I went and bought my book. And when I came back, he had this book open, and he was reading a transcript. And as I looked over his shoulder, I said, hey, Irving, you should do a play. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, basically, from the walk from Shakespeare Books and Company to Benny's Burritos on Avenue A, we had then sat down and sketched out everything about what that play would look like on a cocktail napkin. And that was in June of 1999. The play opened in October of 1999.
So are all plain transcripts this depressing? It's not like I don't want to go get on a flight right now, Bob, but I mean, I'm just saying there was no Miracle on the Hudson transcript tonight.
Well, they're not that depressing. Yes.
I thought the 3D stuff really gave it a sense of kind of being in a downtown theater, in the presence, and I'm just curious at what point in the process of translating from a play to the film that the 3D part kind of entered into.
That's a sweet question and one that I've always wanted to answer. I mean, the experience of seeing this play in a 50-seat off-Broadway theater, half the size of this room, I don't know, maybe a little bit smaller than this room, but flat, and what used to be a shoe store on Ludlow Street. And the feeling of sitting in that theater with borrowed equipment from the Philip Glass Orchestra powering a ridiculous sound system that was the airplane being played live to the performance was an incredible experience. And we were always feeling incredibly lucky to have created something that was that powerful a live experience. And we had people were very excited about the play, and we were really excited to be doing it. And as the play traveled around and toured different places and stuff like that, there was all this talk about make a movie, or people wanted to make a movie, but really what we wanted to do was capture that feeling, or see if we could capture that feeling of what it was like to sit in the audience and see that. Because the play itself, part of the aesthetic power of the play is austerity. Is the fact that there's just a couple people sitting in something that almost looks like an airplane cockpit, but they're this close to you the whole time, and that experience is live right there, and that's that proximity. And so a combination of factors, seeing Wim Wenders' Peanut, and then finding ourselves like, oh, well, we turned down or gotten engaged over the years with lots of different people that wanted to talk to us about making the movie. And the key reason why that never happened was because they never wanted us to have anything to do with it. It wasn't about, all we wanted was to have something to do with it, and all they wanted was to buy that name, ultimately. And we didn't want that because we went out on tour with Al Haynes. Al Haynes followed up performances of Charlie Victor Romeo by getting on stage and talking to audiences of doctors. So we met many people. People would stand up in audiences after seeing the play and say, oh, well, this is the Maximum Center for the Arts in Ohio or whatever. And I was in seat 63A on United 232. I'm wondering if there are any other survivors. A lot of them lived here. So we met firemen that worked at Bradley. We met relatives of the crew of Aero Peru. We had this relationship with the aviation community because pilots came to see that play. The Air Force filmed it and the Defense Department gave us an award. So we had this relationship with the arts and with aviation. And all we wanted to do, the thing we wanted to do the most was preserve or try to capture that experience in a way that made people feel like you just said what felt. So, okay, we should accomplish that. That's what we wanted to do. Yes, sir.
How or were you able to get the cockpit electronic sounds accurately, and if you were able to power it, or is that just kind of just made up by the actors?
No, what we did was so the real answer is that in 2012, Microsoft Flight Simulator had been modded to the point where real airplane people had gone out and made sound packages for accurate cockpit sounds for all of the airplanes depicted. So the transcript specifically says overspeed alarm, and it's noted at this point. And we had a sampler in the sound booth where we were doing the play. We had two engineers manning the sound booth. One of them was monitoring all of the mic levels because everybody was wearing a mic live on stage and backstage and in the sound booth. And that person was also controlling the sounds of the ambiances of the sound of the jet engines, that stuff. And then the other one, which was me, was controlling the sampler that said, oh, this is the 757 overspeed alarm. This is the 757 stick shaker. This is this. And so in the transcripts themselves, they're very specific about what sound it is. And so that's how we do it, basically. Good job.
From the source material that you had, were there more incidences that you used? And then what was the process? If so, how did you guys pick the ones that you ended up using depicting the show?
We looked at a lot of them. There were lots of sources, some of them available at that time on websites, books, things like that. And the real quick way of answering this, I know this is a good question. the real quick way is that we had 3 criteria in mind. We wanted things that were interesting from an aviation perspective, things that were some well-known, some not so well-known. We wanted things that were interesting from a human perspective, meaning that we wanted to find situations that mirrored situations that happened to all of us. So I was a satellite truck engineer. I was a cameraman for CNN. Anybody that's been in the driving in the storm with your friend and it's raining and you're in the passing lane and the semi-tractor trailer that's next to you swerves a little bit towards you and the person sitting next to you grabs your leg or says, hey, or whatever. That's all the same thing, right? It's just a different professional culture, a different world, different stakes, but similar feelings. And then we wanted to find things that were interesting from a dramatic perspective, like what happened on the flight deck of the Space Shuttle Challenger is incredibly interesting from an engineering perspective, but what was said on the flight deck isn't. So we wanted to find things that we thought would be interesting, theatrical. Yes.
I was very fortunate to see the play at the Fringe Festival 24 years ago, and it was the most terrifying thing I've ever seen.
You saw it at Charles?
Yes. And still today, I felt the same way. But
were you there the night the lights blew out?
I don't think so. But,
Charlie Victor Romeo, just a thing, right? This is East Village Fringe Festival 2000 and...
2000, I think it was.
2000?
Yeah.
Second Fringe Festival.
I think so,
right?
yes.
And we were normally a collective unconscious on Ludlow Street, but Charas Alboio, the building that's been so controversial in East Village right next to Tompkins Square Park, big, giant, used to be a school, but a community center. And in that building is a giant theater, like what was a high school theater.
Right.
And, anyway.
Well, so I was just curious because you said that you developed this in July and had it up by October, and then obviously moved and it ran for a long time and you toured it. How did the play change, if at all, over the course of that time?
There's 2 things that happened. One, the cast evolved. Some people left, some more people came. And the only other real change from what you saw in this was that in 2000, so around about the time that you saw it, a guy named Yoji Sakate of the Rinkugun Theater Company in Tokyo saw it, and he started talking to, maybe right after that, he started talking to the people that were touring, managing our touring, which were Pomegranate Arts in New York. And at Arts Presenter Conference that year, he went to them and he was like, I want to do this in Tokyo. And over the course of that, like leading up to 2000, we negotiated with them, and then Patrick and Irving and me and Jamie Moranis, the sound guy, went over there. And part of that arrangement was that the Japanese Airline Pilots Association had to translate, helped Rinkugun Theater Company translate all of the English transcripts into Japanese. And in exchange for giving them the rights to do that, they took the Japanese transcript of Japan Airlines and translated that to English. And it's cool that you asked that question because it brings up this really interesting other thing about transcripts and human factors and culture. Like in every Godzilla movie you've ever seen, the distinction of the way that the honorific in the Japanese language exists is unrealistic. You know, like if you transport, if you're French, if a French person says the ship is sinking and an American engineer looks it up and translates it to the ship she is sinking. And the same thing in Japanese. If you say yes to your kid or yes to your best friend or yes to your boss, those are 3 different words. And if you're not really thinking about it, then the yes to your boss translates literally as yes, sir, every time you say it. So every time you see a Japanese, like Godzilla movie, old school, they're all like, yes, sir, 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 to the point where you're like, they're robots. And the big difference is that in the original version of Charlie Victor Romeo, the Japan Airlines scene was a lot shorter, and there was a whole lot of yes, sir. And in this one, there's only one yes, sir. And it's way more powerful, yes, sir. And the first officer says, yes, sir, the captain, because it's not that honorific, right? So that's, as far as I know, that's the big change. Anyway. Yeah.
Stick around.
Right?
I learned something every day.
Anyway, thank you guys very much for coming.